Put my screen. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining in today for our 24 hours of climate reality. This we're presenting to you guys for the Kathmandu Hub, but all over the world right now, many different climate realities leaders are presenting this to many different stakeholders. So thank you for being here. Let's get started. So first, we're going to be talking about a little bit about what climate this 24-hour challenge is. Then I'll talk a little bit about must we change in regards to this climate change. And Shubhangi will talk about what are the impacts to us, and then Mohit will wrap up with can we change. So let's get started. So this 24 hours of reality, like I said, it happens every year. And this year it happens to be in October 10th to 11th, so it's 24 hours. And Al Gore and many other climate reality leaders are sharing, talking about climate crisis, making sure that as many people can find out about the climate crisis as much as possible within these 24 hours. And we want to see the impact that it can make within 24 hours. And we chose you guys, all of you, because first of all, you are leaders in your own fields and you're leaders in your own regards. So we want you all to be aware of the climate crisis and keep this in the back of your minds in whatever decisions you make in your everyday life, when you talk about these things to people all around you. And actually this year happens to be in a really good day because it's coinciding with World Mental Health Day. And this is interesting because the climate crisis is not just a physical occurrence, right? It affects us all mentally as well. So keep that in mind as we go through the presentation today. All right, so must we change? This seems like a little bit of a redundant question because we do really need to change, but I just want to talk about, the reasons why we must. So here we go. So we all know this diagram from school, the greenhouse effect. So energy from the sun warms the earth. And then we learned that because of the atmosphere and the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, some of this energy gets trapped on the atmosphere and some bounces back. We also learned that due to man-made global greenhouse gases, a lot of the solar radiation is getting trapped more so than normal, right? So we learn about this, we all know about this, but sometimes we don't have an idea of the extent of the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. So to give you a better understanding of this, James Hansen, who was a former NASA director, put it into a more easy way to understand this. So the energy trapped by man-made global warming pollution is equivalent to 500,000 first-generation atomic bombs per day. That means every single day we have 500,000 atomic bombs exploding into our atmosphere, and this is happening 365 days of the year. So I hope this gives you a little bit more of a perspective of, the damage that we're doing to our atmosphere every day. 19 of the hottest years on record ever have occurred since the year 2001. So you see all these years in red or orange are years that it's every year we've set a record in the hottest temperatures every year. And actually, even the 20th hottest year is not that far back. It's just 1998. So all of these have been really, really recently. And to give you a better understanding of this, this is a series of graphs developed by Columbia University. So what we're doing here is that we're taking the year 1951 as our baseline year, and then we're measuring the Northern Hemisphere summer temperatures, right? So keep this green line in mind. This is the average that they've measured in 1951. And if we go to the next decade, you can see the average in general is moving further to the right. Another decade, again, further to the right. And this most recent decade, you can see that, a significant shift to the right, which means that the extreme temperature events, which used to cover only 0.1% of the land, now covers 22.1%. According to IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it's a body of 1,300 scientists. It's a UN initiative. there will be a rise of 2.5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit over the next century. So we're not being able to really manage this temperature increase year over year. What does this mean for us? So talking about the most recent and most relevant example would be the 2020 California fires. So last year, when I heard about the California wildfires, I was really amazed and shocked to see the amount of destruction that happened. It was all over social media, all over the news, right? And that was around less than 120,000 acres. Now, this year, that number completely is blown out of the water because 4.1 million acres of land has already burned down. And to give you guys a little bit of perspective of what that means, that would mean Kathmandu Valley, which would be Kathmandu, Lalpur, and Bhaktapur all put together, burning down 30 times over. And the worst part is the fire season isn't even over yet. And if you look to the bottom right image out here, it looks kind of like a photoshopped image, but trust me, it's not. This is, and I'm not kidding, this is a literal fire tornado that is being formed in California. These are happening a lot this year. So it's a literal tornado made of fire. This is all happening because of climate change. This is a slightly older image, but still very, very relevant. So the 10 largest displacement events, or migration events of 2016 were all climate related. So here you can see in China and in India, you see so many, like 2 million people were displaced because of flooding. In Philippines, almost 5 million people were displaced because of typhoons. In the US and Cuba has more news coverage, but you can see that a lot of displacement happened here too. So this is one of those factors that is not just a physical impact, but it's also huge psychological and mental impact for these people who have to leave their homes, leave their livelihoods because of climate-related issues. Here's a little bit of trivia that's really interesting. So this is a Noah's Ark replica made in Williamston, Kentucky. And last year in May, they sued the insurers for $1 million because there was damages to the ark because of a historic rainfall. So a little bit of ironic trivia for you guys out here. Here's another picture of flooding in China. A lot of people were affected. There's so many pictures of flooding all over the world. We didn't want to inundate you with too much information, so we've just picked a few. Here's another one. So this is in York, England. And you can see the flood line is almost halfway up the window, but you know, the pub must stay open no matter what, right? So the fact that we put this image in, it's to signify that even developed countries, like no one's safe from climate change. Even developed countries are gonna suffer consequences. And actually, according to a New York Times article recently published, by 2050, significant portions of New York, Mumbai, and Bangkok, and many other big cities will substantially be underwater. So big cities, developed countries are also getting affected. Now, moving to Nepal. So you must be wondering, why didn't I talk about Nepal before? So one of the reasons is that according to the IPCC, the Himalayan area is a white spot for data. What does that mean? It means that not enough research, not enough studies have been done in this area. And by that, it doesn't mean that we aren't affected by this climate change. It just means that we don't have enough data or information, right? But from the information that we do have, this is information published by NASA actually, there will be a 30 to 70% increase in landslide in the Nepal China border directly related to climate change. This is a picture of melting glaciers in Nepal. Shubhangi will be covering this in detail, so I won't go too much into this. This is not this one, but recently we discovered a dragonfly species in Pokhara, but this might be going extinct soon because loss of habitat related to climate change. And you know, even though we have the glaciers in the Himalayas and all this fresh water that could be potentially sources of drinking water for Nepal, Nepal is actually the fourth most water-stressed country in South Asia and the 40th most water-stressed in the world. So even though we have access to these glaciers, we're actually already suffering from lack of water. And this problem is just going to continue more in the future. And of course, there have been so much flooding recently. You all must remember the Banipa flooding. There's a lot of videos about it. It's really scary and it's just increasing every day, causes a lot of damage. And now Shubhangi will be talking about a little more about these.
Thank you so much, Srishti. So the impacts of climate change are innumerable. Today we'll be focusing on the three main impact areas, that is water, food supply, and global health. So let's start with water. In Nepal, 70% of the available water is used in agriculture, 20% in industries, and 10% for domestic purposes. Nepal is one of the richest countries in the world in water resources. However, we still face issues related to water scarcity, water crisis, and water pollution, all because of lack of proper management of the resource. With a staggering 42% of the population living below the poverty line and only 27% with improved access to water and sanitation, there are numerous issues related to water in our country. And if you look at the demand for water, when the temperature goes up because of climate crisis, it increases the use of water by people, by agriculture, for crops, and by industries. In the 20th century itself, water consumption increased sixfold, largely due to agricultural use. Shrinking water supplies have profound real-world consequences for everyday lives and economies. Water crisis affects the minorities and the suppressed. In Nepal, water scarcity, especially in the rural areas, affects women and girls as they are responsible for household chores and for fetching water. So something very interesting is that lack of running water now for washing hands is an incredibly serious issue during the COVID-19 pandemic. Inequalities in water access have increased the global vulnerability to the pandemic. And to make things more critical, the demand for water is just going up. So this is an interesting projection that builds up going on the last 15 years and projects 10 years into the future. So as you can see, China and India, both our neighboring countries, are leading the way. This will directly or indirectly affect Nepal's economy as well as water system. In Asia, between a third and two-thirds of the glaciers in the Himalayas will melt in this century. And it depends on us if we can save the Great Himalayas, how quickly we reduce emissions and conserve the environment. So people in the hilly and the Tarai area depend on the meltwater annually. And this is an extremely serious issue because these glaciers provide water to about a quarter of people all over the world. And as these glaciers disappear, it adds up to more problems. The rate of melt in the Himalayas has doubled since 2000. So just imagine yourself using a hairdryer over these Himalayas. Yes, that's how fast they're melting. So we also have another interesting photo of a young person searching for crabs and fish on the parched bed of Chembarambakkam Lake in Chennai in May 2019, which is nearly out of water as all its reservoirs have run dry. So in India, about 2 lakhs people die every year from unsafe water, but the crisis is projected to get much worse and soon. The cause of India's water crisis is a complicated combination of climate change, overpopulation, and mismanagement. And this is the exact path Nepal is following. So now we have a very interesting map depicting Earth's uninhabitable zones today and projected for 2070. So right now, the areas deemed uninhabitable are relatively few, but here is what the scientific community is projecting for the next century. These shaded areas are quite significant, and the conditions, unless we act, are due to become so harsh that people can't live there. So many experts also see climate change as a threat multiplier and a driver of conflict. So can we change to another slide? So the most powerful billboard in the Brexit campaign in the UK was this one, showing a very long line of refugees, all from the Middle East. It is an example of how climate refugees, when the flow exceeds a certain threshold, can disrupt the political equilibrium in their countries, as well as in the neighboring countries. So increasing level of heat trapping greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are causing global average temperature to rise. So, but then here's a very interesting fact. A 1-degree temperature increase at the equator will often be 3 times that much in the Arctic, and over the time, that's 3 times the warming potential in the Arctic region. So now, moving on to food supply. So to get a better perspective on this, look at the entire global food supply system. Asia is in a chronic food deficit, so we import from these other regions naturally. But what that means is that disasters in one region can reverberate in affecting the food supply in other parts of the world. We're now in the middle of this pandemic, and it's worth remembering that COVID-19 has already pushed a lot more people into the hunger status. And some of the scientists are deeply concerned about this. COVID-19 has resulted in high rates of unemployment globally, which combined with other factors could lead to food insecurity. So we're also seeing the projections for decline in crop yields of significant amount in corn, wheat, rice, and soy. And these four crops make up 2/3 of the calorie intake for humans all around the world. The global food system is incredibly complex and shaped by many interrelated factors. The three most prominent climate change challenges crop faces are heat stress, pests, and diseases, declining their yield. So this is another interesting photo of swarms of locusts in Rajasthan in June 2020, an impact of climate change in the area. Higher temperature and lack of water causes toxins to accumulate in our food supply. In Asia, we're seeing higher CO2 levels increase the severity of diseases, both in rice and in wheat, two major crops in our daily diet. Food challenges don't end here. We're seeing nutrients that are more important to human health, like copper, magnesium, and calcium being diminished as the CO2 level themselves go higher. And this is a problem because in order to get the same amount of nutrients, more bulk food is required. So now we go to our third impact, that is global health. So let's start with the air we breathe. It is quite obvious how the air in Kathmandu itself has degraded with time. Air pollution kills 9 million people every year. So we have a map showing the areas that are suffering the worst impact from death by air pollution. Nepal is relatively on the safer side. However, if we do not act fast, things will definitely change. Pollution from extracting and burning fossil fuels and from CO2 emissions aren't only driving climate crisis, it's also creating a public health crisis worldwide. In India, 13% of all the deaths in 2017 was due to air pollution. Climate change is an environmental justice issue. Vulnerable communities are more affected by climate change and have less ability to adapt or recover from it. These communities also live in areas affected by climate change issues, which further make it difficult for them to recover without any external help. Now, talking about oceans, oceans are absorbing most of the extra heat energy trapped by increased greenhouse gases. The Great Barrier Reef, one of the wonders of the world, has lost half of all the coral cover in the last 30 years. 30% of that just comes in the last 4 years. So now, since we're again talking about the ocean, let's talk about these dead zones that we're hearing about and reading about a lot. So a dead zone means no oxygen in the water. We're seeing the dead zones not only at the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico, not only in the areas where rivers meet the sea, but we're seeing them way deep in the ocean. And this is a warning sign. So now I would like to hand it over to Mohit to tell us how we can change as a community.
Thank you, Srishti and Shubhangi, for talking about the past and the present. So let me talk about the future. And with the most important question, can we change? So let me start with wind energy first. In 2000, there was a projection that suggests, can we change the slide, please? Right, so let's talk about wind energy first. Back in 2000, there was a projection that suggested worldwide wind capacity will reach 30 gigawatt by 2019. But guess what? The reality said something else. By 2019, that goal was exceeded by a factor of 22 times. In terms of global wind energy capacity, back in 1980, which was close to zero, in 2019, it is close to 700,000 megawatts, which is an incredible rise. In terms of onshore wind cost, back in 1984, we were close to about 200 euros per megawatt per hour. But in 2018, we're close to 25 euros per megawatt per hour, which shows us that this trend is going down. We can see this incredible picture from Sweden. The steel mill, in operation since 1604, has produced the world's first fossil-free steel using hydrogen for heat. And it's an incredible feat. This picture from Germany suggests renewable produced 56% of Germany's electricity in the first half of 2020. And that's, again, another incredible accomplishment. So far in 2020, Portugal has gone 59 days and the UK has gone 67 days with no coal-fired electricity. Again, something to be proud of. The United Kingdom generated more than 18 times as much electricity from renewables as from coal in 2019. That takes me back to 1956, where a lot of people were claiming that Britain will fail without coal. But last year, The Guardian published this report suggesting that Great Britain records 2 weeks of coal-free electricity generation, which just tells us that a shift is definitely possible. In terms of this incredible stat, globally, wind could supply worldwide electricity consumption 40 times over, which is incredible. So now let's switch to solar energy. In 2002, there was a projection that suggested the solar energy market will grow 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. But guess what? The reality is that the goal was exceeded by 121 times. In terms of world solar PV installation, back in 1980, we were close to zero. But just in 2019, we're seeing about 700 gigawatts solar PV installations. In terms of cost of solar cell modules, back in 1976, which was close to $80 per watt, has now gone down to just 20 cents per watt in 2020. And this is a huge drop in terms of cost of solar cell modules. And then switching to this incredible fact from India, India used to be generally reliant on coal, but back in 2019, 55% of new capacity was solar and wind, the generation of electricity, which just shows how India has adapted to this change. This incredible picture from Bangladesh is a great example of how home solar panels can be adapted, and this can be the future for Nepal. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the Vatican. This picture shows a great contrast between religion and technology and how religion can be slightly tilted towards technology when the earth needs us. Talking about Gujarat, a lot of people in India are now seeing the fact that solar energy is getting cheaper and cheaper day by day, which is again another incredible feat. Let me talk about this incredible fact. Enough solar energy reaches Earth every hour to fill all the world's energy needs for a full year. This is how amazing solar energy is. I just want to compare solar and electricity with coal and gas. Back in 2014, electricity from solar and wind was cheaper than new coal and gas plants in approximately 1% of the world. Just 1% in 2014. But in 2019, just 5 years later, solar and wind provided the cheapest sources of new electricity in 2/3 of the world. And within the next 5 years, these sources are expected to provide the cheapest new electricity in the entire world, just by 2024. Talking about global electric cars, I'm missing Sahayu, but he would have loved this fact. In 2010, very few people were using electric cars, but by 2020, about 7 million people are using electric cars on the road. General Motors believes the future is all electric, and that's the EVP of General Motors. That's what he says. And talking about this incredible truck, Tesla released this semi-truck that will have a 300 to 500 mile range and use just 2 kilowatt per hour of electricity per mile. And by 2025, half of the world's buses are expected to be all electric. You can see the trend that is going up. And this is a very recent stat. In September, more than 60% of new cars sold in Norway were electric. Again, this information is from World Economic Forum, but it just says how this transition is happening. So let's talk about the Paris Agreement. In 2015, every nation in the world agreed to work together to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century. Of course, after Donald Trump came in, US withdrew. But the US cannot legally withdraw until the day after 2020 presidential election. So let's hope Joe Biden wins it. And one of the first things he's going to do is to rejoin the Paris Agreement. Talking about our neighbors, China and India, both of them are on track to overachieve. I repeat, overachieve their Paris commitments, which is incredible. But what about Nepal? So Nepal contributes only 0.02% to global greenhouse emission. It's as low as 0.027%. However, it comes fourth on the list of countries most vulnerable to the impact of climate change. We've seen droughts, we've seen excessive rainfall, floods, landslides, and melting glaciers because of climate change, which will affect communities with poor socioeconomic status. But a recent report suggested that Nepal is still not on track to achieve the Paris commitments. So with that in mind, let this be a reality check for all of us. Srishti, Shubhangi, and I, we spoke about the past, the present, and the future. Now everything depends on us to change the world because our world depends on us. Thank you very much for attending this presentation. If you have any questions, you can write to us. And if you have any comments, you can hit us up with that. Thank you very much.
If any of you have any questions, we'll take some of them right now. We have about 8 minutes left in the Zoom call. But if you have any questions moving forward, you can also just message.
Okay, I have a question. So we talked a lot about climate change in perspective to the world, right? But when it comes to Nepal, what would be the first signs of climate change that would be seen in Nepal during the initial stages?
Thank you so much, Ayush. Can I take this question, guys, and you can just add up?
Sure, go ahead.
So that's a really good question, and we've already started seeing a lot of changes, especially because of the glaciers. And like how Srishti had mentioned, because the Himalayas sometimes turn out to be a white spot, a lot of studies has not been done, but now a lot of studies has been done, and what's been found out that, like I had mentioned, it's like we're using a hair dryer over the Himalayas, and since the water itself is also increasing in temperature, when the glaciers do fall down, the water just melts it faster, quicker, which also causes flooding in a lot of area. That's been a problem, especially due to monsoon. And even this year there was so much rainfall, more than what the monsoon really brings into Kathmandu as well. That itself is also one of the reasons of climate change. And again, because we ourselves are using so much of groundwater through boring and all that things, especially in Kathmandu, because we already are in a deficit of water resources. That's another reason that this is a reason that climate change is affecting Nepal. And other various reasons are landslide that's been happening, and one of the main eye-opening reason was the flooding that was happening in Sindhu Palchok a few months back.
To add to Shubhangi's list, also, the locusts, the infestation all over, even in Africa and in Bihar, even in the southern parts of Nepal, that's an indication of climate change. So the amount of pests increase as our temperature gradually increases. So that's a huge indicator, right? Our productivity as an agricultural nation is being affected directly by those pests.
Yeah, and just to add a few things to those points that Srishti and Shubhangi made is like, in terms of visibility, we've seen a significant amount of increase in terms of drought and rainfall and floods and landslides. And, these are all visible impacts. That is all because of climate change. And obviously we might not be feeling it, but a lot of communities are already seeing these impacts.
Thanks for the question, Ayush. Does anyone else have?
Thank you, guys. That was really insightful.
Thanks, Ayush. We have 5 minutes. Any questions? We'll try and answer.
This is not a question, but one update. I think it was yesterday or day before, where our Prime Minister, in some conference that he was attending, he highlighted about this climate change issue and the impact that the country is facing. So, which kind of indicates that the government is taking this very seriously, and the government is very aware that Nepal is definitely getting some hit of this global issue that's happening around. I think it was yesterday or the day before, but it was very recent information.
I have a query. I'm not sure if you'll be exactly able to answer it, but based on the presentation, the way I saw it was it highlighted the wind energy and solar energy, right? But if you look at how Nepal has been operating, hydropower and water resources is one of the key contributors to energy. So I think that was missing in the presentation, or maybe I'm not sure if this was a general presentation that was provided by the Climate Reality Program, or if it was prepared by you guys. But don't you think hydropower was one of the key elements that should have been included?
That's a really good question, Sachit. And so that I'm really glad you asked that actually. So wind and solar are the direction that most of the world is going towards. Because Nepal has like so much water, right? Hydro is the way to go for us. Solar and wind, in terms of those, a lot of studies have been done. And actually, we aren't able to completely harness all of our energy needs from solar and wind. We just don't have enough like wind power or solar area coverage to provide for that. So hydro is definitely really, really essential. And I think Shubhangi can talk about this.
Yes, thank you so much, Sachit. So this was actually what we were discussing also before we, sat down and made the presentation. But again, like Srishti said, the reason we did not really focus on hydropower is because hydropower itself has a lot of consequences right now, especially because the environmental impact assessment in Nepal is not that strong enough, and hydropowers are creating a lot of problem in the biodiversity and the ecosystem of the area, as well as for the habitats, because people have to migrate, and there's a lot of climate refugees just because of hydropowers being developed, especially in Nepal. So that's the only reason we did not put in, because we just wanted to bring in a new perspective. But that's a really good question. Thank you so much, Sachit.
Yeah, thank you.
So very, very quickly, with less than a minute left, if anyone has like a quick question,
1 minute, 25 seconds, yeah.
Yeah, if anyone has like really short question, or if anyone has any comments, would be happy to take it. Else, you guys can write it to us, and we'll try our best to answer them.
Quickly answering something Sachit said, a lot of this presentation is a pre-made slide deck. So the whole point of climate reality training is that Al Gore takes us through his climate reality presentation, which is like a 500, 600 page slideshow that he goes over. And what we did is that we took those 500-600 slides and narrowed it down to, I don't know, I think it was 50 from last I checked. And so we tried to make it more relevant to you guys and make it maybe a little more interactive than the original slides. I think our time is wrapping up. So really want to thank all of you so much for joining in, right? Mohit, Shubhangi, if you want to go ahead too.
Yes, thank you so much, guys, for joining in, and hope it was insightful.
Thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you guys for joining it.
Such questions.
Thank you, greenkeepers.
Thank you all. Thanks.